The gate, the sun had just begun to rise over Chennai, casting a warm glow over the modest neighborhood where Sundar Pichai grew up. In a small two-room apartment, Sundar shared a bed with his younger brother, their dreams confined within the walls of their humble home. His father, Raghunatha Pichai, worked as an electrical engineer at the British conglomerate GEC, while his mother, Lakshmi, was a stenographer before becoming a homemaker. Encyclopedia Britannica. 10 CEO today plan, 10 scribd plan. Despite their limited means, Sundar's parents placed immense value on education. They believed that knowledge was the key to a better life, and they instilled this belief in their children. Sundar attended Jawahar Vidyalaya Senior Secondary School in Chennai, and later completed his class Thashung at Vanavani School at IIT Madras. CEO Today +1 The Times +1 College Search +4. The Times of India +4 Kittle +4 From a young age, Sundar exhibited an extraordinary memory, especially for telephone numbers. He could recall every number dialed on the rotary phone, a skill that amazed his family and hinted at his future in technology. Encyclopedia Britannica. Scribdone Day. As Sundar prepared to leave for school, he noticed his mother standing outside the gate, her eyes filled with concern. She handed him a small tiffin box, her hands trembling slightly. "Eat well, Sundar," she said softly. He nodded, sensing that something was amiss, but he didn't press her, choosing instead to focus on his studies. Years later, Sundar would recall that moment as a turning point in his life, a silent plea from his mother that fueled his determination to succeed. After earning a bachelor's degree in metallurgical engineering from IIT Kharagpur, Sundar was awarded a scholarship to study at Stanford University, where he earned a master's degree in materials science and engineering. He later completed an MBA at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Maps of India +9 Economic Times +9 Clay +9 A Sundar boarded the plane to the United States. He looked back at his mother, who stood outside the gate once more, her eyes brimming with tears. He waved, silently vowing to make her proud. The Financial Express +8 stars unfolded planked home. 8 Little did he know, his journey was just beginning. The first step, the cold air inside the airplane felt like a different world. Sundar sat by the window, his hands quietly folded over the single brown bag that held everything he was taking to America. 2 pairs of clothes, a set of pens his father gave him, and a small diary from his mother, filled with handwritten Tamil prayers. He didn't open the diary yet. He kept staring out of the window, lost in thoughts that were louder than the engines. Outside, the world looked small and slow, like nothing could ever go wrong from so far above. But inside Sundar's chest, something was tightening. He was not scared. Not exactly. It was something else. Maybe the weight of leaving home. Maybe the invisible thread between him and the woman still standing behind that old gate in Chennai, holding on to hope like a breath she didn't want to let go. When he landed in California, the light was harsh and foreign. The air smelled different. The people walked quickly and spoke fast with accents he could barely follow. Sundar found his way to the Stanford campus with the help of a small paper map. He had never used a map like that before. Back home, directions were passed down in the rhythm of voices, not on pieces of paper. His first night in the dorm was quiet. He didn't have a blanket. He didn't know where the heater switch was, so he curled up with his jacket pulled tight around his body and thought about the sound of his mother's voice calling him to dinner. He could almost hear the pressure cooker whistle from their tiny kitchen. It made his eyes sting. The next day, he walked into his first lecture. The room was large, with walls covered in complex diagrams. The other students looked confident, dressed in clothes that fit their world. Sundar's shirt had loose threads at the collar, but he held his head up. He sat in the front row. He opened his notebook. When the professor spoke, Sundar wrote down every word, every symbol, even the pauses, not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he believed, deep in his bones, that this was his chance. This was the door his parents had never had the chance to open, and he wasn't going to waste it. The days passed fast, and Sundar worked harder than anyone else. He read through nights. He borrowed books others left untouched. He memorized formulas and tested himself on old exams he found in dusty library corners. And still, there were times he felt like he didn't belong. When other students talked about vacations in Europe or new gadgets, Sundar stayed silent. He didn't have a computer. He used the university lab late at night after others had left, just to study how machines worked. One evening as he was leaving the lab, he found a payphone and decided to call home. The line buzzed before his mother's voice came through. She sounded smaller through the crackling connection. "Did you eat, Sundar?" she asked, like always. "Are you sleeping enough?" He wanted to tell her everything. The cold nights, the confusing lectures, the moments when he wanted to give up, but he didn't. Instead, he just said, "Yes, Amma. Everything is okay." After that call, he opened the diary she had given him. He had never looked inside before. The pages were filled with neat handwriting. Prayers, yes, but also notes, small lines of advice, reminders to breathe, to forgive himself, to try again the next day. One line stood out. "Your path will be hard, but your steps are strong." He traced that line with his finger. For the first time since arriving in America, he smiled. Weeks turned into months. Sundar started to gain confidence. He spoke more in class. Professors noticed his ideas, how clear they were, how deeply he had thought them through. One even pulled him aside and asked, "Where did you learn to think like this?" Sundar didn't have a clear answer. He just said, "I listen." And that was true. Sundar had always been a listener. From his father's stories about circuits, from his mother's whispers of prayer from the street sounds outside their flat in Chennai, listening had shaped him. One winter evening, something unexpected happened. Sundar was attending a seminar, and a guest speaker from a small Silicon Valley startup noticed him. After the talk, the speaker approached him. "You asked a very good question," he said. "Have you ever considered working in product design?" Sundar shook his head. He had never heard those two words together before. Product, design. But he listened closely. The man gave him a business card. "Come visit sometime," he said. That night, Sundar walked back to his dorm in silence. The card burned in his pocket, like a secret. He wasn't sure what this meant, but it felt like a door had just opened. A real door. And somewhere in Chennai, his mother would still be standing by the gate, waiting for the next page in his story. He pulled out her diary again. Read the last line she had written. "When the world doesn't know your name, walk as if it already does." He didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, but from something else entirely. Something new. Something beginning. The silence before the spark the next morning. Sundar sat by the window in the university library, watching soft rain tap against the glass. The air outside was thick with fog, but inside him, a different kind of cloud had started to lift. The business card was still in his hand, worn now at the corners from being held too tightly. It was just a card, white with blue print. But to Sundar it felt heavier than the textbooks stacked around him. It carried a question he'd never allowed himself to ask before. What if his life could be more than just survival? For most of his life, Sundar had walked a narrow path. One paved with careful steps, low expectations, and quiet endurance. Not because he lacked ambition, but because dreaming too big had always felt like something borrowed, not owned. But something about that question, "Have you ever considered product design?" would not leave him. It felt like someone had seen something in him that he hadn't dared to see in himself. That evening, Sundar called home again. His father answered this time. The connection was weak, the words broken with static, but his father's voice had not changed. It still carried that calm, measured tone, like someone who trusted logic even in the face of uncertainty. Sundar told him about the seminar, about the man, about the card. There was a pause on the line. Then came his father's reply, slow but firm. "If someone opens a door for you, Sundar, don't stand at the threshold." Those words stayed with him. A week later, Sundar found himself standing outside a quiet office in Palo Alto. The building looked ordinary, just glass and steel, but inside it was alive with ideas. People moved quickly, talked in half sentences, filled with words he barely understood, code, user flow, latency, API. It was overwhelming. But Sundar didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that the best way to enter a new world was to listen before speaking. The man from the seminar greeted him, handed him a black notebook, and asked him to sit in on a product brainstorming session. Sundar said little during the meeting. He took notes. He watched. And then at one point he raised his hand. He asked a question about how the team decided which features were necessary and which were noise. The room went quiet for a beat. The lead designer smiled. "That's a good question," she said. "No one's asked it like that before." He left the office with no promise, no job, no salary, just a sense that something had shifted. He had entered a space he was not expected to belong to. And yet, he had not been asked to leave. Back at Stanford, Sundar poured himself into learning more. He didn't study just for grades anymore. He studied because he was curious, because he wanted to understand how things worked, not just how machines worked, but how people thought, how choices were made, how products shaped behavior. He found himself fascinated by the intersection of technology and empathy, how a well-designed feature could reduce someone's frustration or give them back 5 minutes of their day. He also began to write, not long essays but short reflections. He wrote about growing up in Chennai, about the first time he touched a computer, about the way his mother always folded his clothes with the same care she folded her prayers. Those memories, once too painful or distant, now became a source of quiet strength. He saw them differently now, not as limits but as roots. And still, he didn't tell many people about the job offer that never came. Not yet. Because it wasn't about that. It was about what had awakened inside him. Something patient. Something steady. Something no longer willing to settle for invisibility. One day, walking across campus with his backpack heavy on one shoulder, Sundar stopped near a bench where two students were arguing over user interface flaws in a newly released web browser. He listened, and then gently he offered a suggestion. Something small. A different way to arrange the navigation bar. They looked at him skeptical, but one of them tried it later and emailed Sundar that night. "Your idea worked. How did you think of that?" Sundar didn't reply immediately. He sat with the message for a while. Then he wrote back simply, "I just pay attention to what frustrates people and ask how it could be kinder." It was a strange word to use in the world of tech, kinder, but Sundar believed it deeply. He had seen what unkindness could do, what it looked like to be ignored, to be the quiet one at the back of the room, the boy with holes in his socks and dust on his school bag. He didn't want to build things that made people feel that way. He wanted to build things that made them feel seen. As graduation approached, Sundar applied for jobs with quiet focus. He had no fancy connections, no recommendations from famous names, just a list of ideas, some projects, and a reputation as someone who asked thoughtful questions. The interviews were difficult. Some companies passed, others didn't reply. But then one call came through. A large company. Not glamorous, not small either, but respected. They wanted him to join a team working on a product that didn't yet exist, an idea that was still just a sketch on a whiteboard. Sundar said yes. He didn't tell anyone right away, not his classmates, not even his parents. He waited. He wanted to see what would happen first. Not because he didn't believe it, but because something inside him still whispered that all this could disappear if he held it too tightly. The night before he started his new role, Sundar sat alone in his apartment. He looked at the small diary again, flipped to the last page. This time. There was a small note he had missed before. It said, "You carry our hopes, but they are not your burden. They are your light." He read that line twice. Then he turned off the lamp, and in the silence, a spark began to grow. The product no one believed in, the first day at the new company, felt nothing like Sundar had imagined. There was no red carpet, No dramatic welcome, no sign that he had stepped into what would later become one of the most important chapters of his life. The office looked ordinary, just long corridors, coffee machines that never worked right, and rows of desks lit by the pale blue of computer monitors. But to Sundar, it felt like a temple of ideas. Quiet, focused, waiting. He was assigned to a small team tucked into a corner of the building. It wasn't glamorous. In fact, no one even talked about their project in the open. It had no name yet, no real direction, just a vague purpose: to make internet search better, faster, easier. The team lead explained it like this: people are drowning in information. We want to hand them a life raft before they even realize they're struggling. It didn't sound revolutionary, but something in Sundar clicked. His job was simple at first: study how people used search engines, where they clicked, where they hesitated, when they gave up. He read endless user reports, watched screen recordings for hours, tracked patterns in behavior that most ignored. He saw things others missed. Small things. The way users paused before typing, how they deleted certain words and replaced them with shorter ones. The sighs, the delays, the quiet digital frustrations. Sundar treated those moments like clues in a mystery only he cared to solve. One night while working late, he had an idea. It wasn't big, just a change in how search results were presented. More context, fewer distractions, a cleaner interface. He mocked it up quietly and showed it to the team the next morning. The response was polite but dismissive. "It's too simple," someone said. "Doesn't move the needle," said another. But Sundar held his ground. He explained not with charts or buzzwords, but with stories. He described the user who typed with one hand while holding a crying child, the grandmother trying to find a recipe her daughter once made, the student who couldn't spell entrepreneur, but dreamed of becoming one. He reminded them that simplicity wasn't the absence of ambition, it was the presence of empathy. After that meeting, the team gave him space to try. Not much, just a small window of trust. Sundar used every minute of it. He tested, he refined. He studied every result like it carried the weight of someone's daily struggle. The product began to take shape, but not everyone saw its value. Higher-ups questioned the investment. "Why are we putting resources into something so basic?" they asked. "This isn't innovation, it's housekeeping." Some even suggested shutting it down. Others just stopped showing up to meetings. It felt like the product was being buried before it had a name. Sundar didn't complain. He kept building. He kept improving. He kept listening, not just to users, but to silence. Because in silence, he could hear what others missed. One afternoon, a company-wide meeting was held. An executive from another department challenged the need for the product entirely. He spoke in numbers, graphs, projections. Then, unexpectedly, Sundar was asked to respond. He stood quietly before the microphone. His palms were sweating. His voice was low at first. "I understand the doubt," he said. But I think we're asking the wrong question. We keep asking, how smart is our technology? I think we should be asking, how much does our technology care? Because if we care about the people using it, we'll find ways to make their lives easier. Even if that starts with something as small as how a search result appears. The room went silent. No one clapped. No one dismissed him either. A few days later, one executive emailed him directly. "I want to see more of what you're building." Bit by bit, interest grew, not because the product was flashy, but because it worked. It understood people. It didn't waste their time. It respected them. It was kind. Finally, the product had a name: Chrome. Not a household name yet, not a global tool, just an idea, starting to find its legs. Many people still didn't believe it could succeed. There are already browsers, they said. People won't switch. But Sundar believed in something different. Not just in Chrome, but in the why behind it. "It's not about switching," he said in a meeting one day. "It's about belonging. We're building something that people can trust to be fast, simple, and safe, without asking them to learn anything new." That was the heart of it. Not brilliance, not disruption. Trust. He started traveling more, meeting engineers, designers, marketers. Always the same approach. Listen first, build second. He never raised his voice, he never rushed. Even when others took credit or questioned his approach, he remained steady, respectful, resilient. He had learned early in life that you don't need to be loud to be heard. You just need to speak with clarity and conviction. Meanwhile, back in Chennai, his mother still stood by that same gate each evening waiting for his call. She didn't understand what Chrome was, she didn't need to. She only asked one thing every time. "Are you happy, Sundar?" And every time, he paused before answering. Because happiness was a word too big, too heavy. But then he remembered. The long nights, the small wins, the faces of people using something he had helped build. "Yes, Amma," he would say. "I think I am." Still, the journey was far from over, because just when Chrome began to rise, something else happened, something Sundar never saw coming, and it would test everything he believed, everything he built, everything he stood for. Day everything nearly fell apart. By the time Chrome launched publicly, it had already faced more skepticism than most products survived. But it didn't just survive. It surprised everyone. It was fast. It was clean. And most importantly, it respected the user's time. Sundar watched as download numbers crept up. Slowly at first, then all at once. Millions of people began choosing Chrome. Not because they were forced to, but because it simply made sense. Inside the company, Sundar was no longer invisible. People started to take note of the quiet engineer with the sharp mind and the calm voice, the one who listened more than he spoke, and somehow always knew the right questions to ask. Leadership began pulling him into bigger meetings, broader discussions. They wanted his opinion on products that had nothing to do with browsers. His name started appearing on emails with more people CC'd than he could count. But success didn't bring peace. In fact, it brought pressure. Chrome's growth had set a new standard, and now everyone expected Sundar to do it again. Only faster, bigger, louder. Expectations began piling up like bricks on his shoulders. Teams looked to him for direction. Executives wanted results. And the quiet space he once cherished was replaced with constant noise. Deadlines, meetings, demands. And then it happened. A critical security flaw was discovered in Chrome. Not theoretical. Not distant. Real. Dangerous. And already being exploited. The news came during a Monday morning status update. Someone whispered it to Sundar mid-meeting. His face didn't change. He simply closed his laptop, stood up, and walked out. Not in panic, in focus. Within hours, he assembled the team. Developers, security leads, support staff, everyone. They sat in a room with whiteboards and empty coffee cups. The vulnerability had the potential to affect millions of users. If exploited widely, it could destroy trust. Undo everything they had built. It wasn't just a technical failure. It was a human one. And Sundar knew it. He didn't blame. He didn't yell. Instead, he asked, "What did we miss?" No one answered at first. Then someone spoke up, voice shaking. "We rushed a patch last month. There was pressure to release." Sundar nodded slowly. "Okay. Then we fix this. Not just the code, but the pressure too." They worked for 3 days without sleep. Sundar was there the entire time, not hovering, not directing like a commander, just present, fixing bugs himself, answering emails, ordering food for the team, reminding people to take short walks, to breathe, to talk to their families. On the second night, a young engineer broke down. Too much stress, too much fear. She sat on the hallway floor, head in her hands. Sundar saw her. He didn't call someone else to deal with it. He walked over, sat next to her, and said, "I've failed before, but I've learned that failure doesn't grow in silence. It shrinks when we face it." Those words didn't erase her pain, but they gave her something stronger than comfort. They gave her permission to keep going. By the third morning, the patch was ready. Tested, triple-checked, deployed, and then came the harder part, telling the world. Many companies hide when things go wrong. They bury the news. They spin it. But Sundar refused. He wrote a public statement himself. It was simple, honest, direct, no technical jargon. Just truth. We failed. We fixed it. And we are making changes so it doesn't happen again. The response was overwhelming. Not because the world is kind when mistakes are made, but because the world respects courage when it's quiet, sincere, and real. Trust was bruised, but not broken. And in that moment, Sundar learned something deeper than product design, deeper than code. He learned that leadership was not about being the loudest in the room. It was about showing up, especially when the sky darkens, when people are scared, when everything you built feels like it could slip away. After the incident, Chrome continued to grow, stronger now, more secure. But Sundar, he changed. He became more careful, not cautious, but thoughtful. He started asking not just what a product could do, but what it should do. He believed that technology was not neutral, that every choice they made shaped someone's day, someone's life. But even as he rose higher in the company, his core stayed the same. He still brought a steel tiffin from home sometimes. He still answered emails late at night, not to impress anyone, but because he cared. And he still called his mother every week. One night after the security scare had passed and things were slowly returning to normal, he sat in his office staring out the window. The lights of Silicon Valley blinked in the dark like stars pretending to be cities. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It read, "We're considering a major restructure. Would you be willing to lead it?" No name, no details. But Sundar knew. This wasn't just another promotion. It was a door, one that would change everything. He took a long breath and thought for the first time in a long time about the smell of jasmine in the morning air in Chennai. The sound of his mother humming as she ironed his school uniform. The taste of curd rice packed lovingly in a stainless steel box. And the look in her eyes the day she stood outside the gate, waving as he left to chase something none of them could see yet, something impossible, something real. The call that changed the world, the message stayed on Sundar's phone screen long after he read it. A simple sentence, quiet in its form, but thunderous in its meaning. "We're considering a major restructure. Would you be willing to lead it?" He didn't reply that night. Instead, he sat still in the soft hum of his office, the distant lights outside like echoes from another life. His mind drifted, not forward into possibility, but backward into memory, into smaller rooms, quieter, voices, simpler days. He thought of the single bulb that lit his home in Chennai, how it flickered during the monsoon season, how his father would carefully unscrew the socket, fix the wires, make it glow again, without ever calling it a burden. He remembered how his mother used to wait at the gate in the evening, holding a folded towel in her hand, even on the days he was late from school. She waited not because she needed to, but because she believed he would come. Now the world wanted him to lead it, or at least a large part of it. But Sundar knew leadership was never just about strategy. It was about trust, about holding the weight of other people's dreams without letting them break. And he didn't take that lightly. The next morning, he responded with 2 words. "Let's talk." The meeting that followed wasn't grand. No cameras, no press, just a quiet room, 3 people, and a whiteboard covered in diagrams. They explained their vision. A new parent company. A different structure, something bold, something untested. Google would no longer be just a company. It would become a part of something larger. They needed someone to carry the soul of what Google was and make it breathe in this new body. They needed someone with vision, with patience, with steel under calm. They needed Sundar. He listened. Not with hunger, but with careful eyes. He asked questions no one else had. Not about power, not about title, but about responsibility, about people, about what would be asked of him, not what would be given to him. And then, with the quiet certainty that had always defined him, he said yes. Soon after, headlines lit up screens across the world. Sundar Pichai named CEO of Google. Many saw it as a rise, an achievement, a title gained. But for Sundar it felt like a return to the same vow he had made years ago when his mother stood outside that old gate with tears in her eyes and a folded tiffin in her hand. A return to the promise he made, not to chase success but to carry dignity through every door he walked through. His first day as CEO was not filled with ceremony. He walked into the office just like every other day, wearing his usual gray sweater, carrying the same black backpack, nodding softly to the front desk guard who had known him since his early days in product. He didn't give a speech, he gave time. He walked to each team. He listened. He thanked them. But behind the calm, a storm of responsibility was beginning. Because with greater power came louder scrutiny, louder criticism, louder demands. And Sundar felt all of it, especially when the world became more divided, when misinformation began spreading faster than truth, when the platforms he now led became mirrors that showed both the best and worst in us. Every decision was heavy. Every move watched. One evening, long after the office had emptied, Sundar sat alone and stared at a blank document on his screen. He was supposed to draft a global message about a controversial issue, something delicate, something explosive. His hands hovered over the keyboard, and then he opened his mother's diary again, the same one he had carried from India to Stanford. The pages were worn now, corners frayed, ink fading. He found a note she had added in the final pages during one of his visits home. If your voice shakes the world, let it tremble with kindness. That night he wrote the message with that line in his heart. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. And in the years that followed, as Sundar stepped into more global challenges, data privacy, tech responsibility, equity and innovation, he led with the same principles that had shaped him in that small apartment in Chennai. Listen first, speak clearly, never forget the people at the other end of the screen, and still every week, no matter how many flights he took or headlines he made, he called his mother. Sometimes it was just a 2-minute call. How are you? She would ask. I'm okay, Amma, he'd reply. Are you eating? She'd say, always. And one day, years later, he called and said, Amma, I want to bring you here, just for a visit. She refused at first. She said she was too old, that she didn't need to go anywhere. But then she said, will you pick me up at the airport if I come? I'll be there before the plane lands, he said. When she arrived, she was quiet at first. She looked around at the airport, at the buildings, at the people who bowed their heads when they recognized Sundar, but she didn't ask about any of it until they reached the company campus. She paused outside the entrance,